We'll go live. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the House Appropriations Committee. This is the second bill hearing of the legislative session for 2021. On behalf of the Appropriations Committee Chairwoman, Maggie McIntosh, we want to thank everyone for being here today. This afternoon, we have 8 bills that will be presented. 4 are sponsor only. And the first bill that we have for today is House Bill 98. Before we get on to hearing the bills, for the members of the public providing testimony today, you'll have 2 minutes and a timer will go off when the time is up. And at that point, you'll be asked to summarize for your final point. To start off today's bill hearings, you're going to hear from Delegate Washington, House Bill 98, which is the Maryland Higher Education Outreach College Access Pilot Program alterations. Delegate Washington, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first and foremost, let me congratulate you on being Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee. So congratulations to you, and thankful for your leadership in the state of Maryland. And thank you for all the members' leadership here in the state of Maryland as well. I'm going to be brief and for the record, my name is Alonzo Washington, here to present testimony in support of HB 98, the Maryland College Access Act. I'm going to be brief because this bill was passed through appropriations last session, 19-0, and passed out of the House 130-0. Simply put, this bill repeals the sunset provisions of the Maryland Higher Education Outreach and College Access Program and renames it as the Maryland College Access Act. This committee established this program as a 2-year pilot program through legislation I proposed in 2015. It was very successful. Then it was given an extension in 2018, and now it's set to expire in 2021. This bill would simply extend the program permanently. Actual favorable report for this bill because programs like this actually help me matriculate through high school and into college. Because right now, more than ever, we need to invest in nonprofits to make sure that they go into low-income neighborhoods and connect with people who have or first-generation college-bound students and get them into college and matriculate them out of college, or even anything outside of the high school. Once they graduate from high school, we want them to get into higher education. So with that said, I ask for a favorable report for this bill and hope that you will support the Alonzo Washingtons of the world that grew up in poverty and homelessness to help them become better citizens and better people here in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Washington. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 98? If you have any questions, please use the raise hand function. Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Washington, for being here. Have a great session. Next, we will hear House Bill 133 from our fellow Appropriations Committee member, Delegate Corman. This is the State Budget, State Finance and Procurement Appropriation Reduction, Board of Public Works Budget Reduction Clarification Act. Delegate Corman, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, colleagues in the Appropriations Committee. I am back before you with another reform to the Board of Public Works mid-year budget reduction authority. As many of you know, about 5 years ago, this committee and the House and the Senate put in place what was ultimately a bipartisan reform to bring more transparency to the mid-year budget cutting process. For those of you who are newer to the committee, when the General Assembly is not in session, the Board of Public Works is empowered to make certain reductions to the budget to keep us in balance, which is an important power. We need to keep our budget in balance even when the General Assembly is not in session. The bill before you would make 3 changes to clarify the statute and improve transparency. First, it would build on the work that we started 5 years ago by extending from 3 business days to 10 business days the amount of time that a proposed reduction needs to be publicly posted prior to the cut being made by the Board of Public Works. Some of you who were on the committee may recall a few years ago the doom and gloom scenarios that were put forth by the administration if we put in place the transparency requirement, and of course It passed anyway on a bipartisan basis, went into law without the governor's signature, and they've still been able to successfully make numerous budget cuts when the situation called for it, just with full transparency and in the light of day. Some of their proposed reductions were either withdrawn or revised based on the feedback they received as a result of the transparent process. But overall, they've been able to do the work they've needed to do. Second, the bill clarifies that the BPW can reduce a total of 25% from of a program over the course of a fiscal year, not 25% every meeting. This has not been an issue with the Hogan administration. They've never sought to do this, but under the previous administration, the O'Malley administration, the Maryland Energy Administration, the Department of Information Technology, and the Department of Housing and Community Development all faced multiple cuts at multiple Board of Public Works meetings through the year that amounted to more than 25% of the total budget for those agencies of state budgeted funds. And then third, on a similar note, the legislation clarifies that the BPW's reduction authority is at the line item level. That is to say, it's not 25% of the overall budget of the agency that they're allowed to reduce by, but at the line item level. So they can't reduce by more than 25% a specific budget line item. An example of when this was done, again, under the previous administration, was actually on a program I don't particularly care for, the Sellinger program, which is money to our private colleges and universities. That's not a program I particularly care for, but the amount of the budget reduction far exceeded 25%. And frankly, I think if you want to reduce a program by that much, that's something for the legislature to do. That the legislature's role should not be supplanted by the Board of Public Works. David Juppé, formerly of the Department of Legislative Services, has submitted testimony where he recommends perhaps changing this to the budget code level instead of the sort of language that I have in the bill. That budget code language is used elsewhere in this part of the statute, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable amendment if the committee is interested in moving forward with this bill. Let me say, I see the secretary is on to testify after the favorable testimony. A few points about that. One, I'm sorry you have to do this today on the day the budget came out. Congratulations on getting that work done. I know this is hopefully usually an afternoon where you get to take a little time off, so I'm sorry you're stuck spending it here with us. Second of all, frankly, the concerns you're going to hear are the same old concerns we heard 5 years ago. Since that time, they've been able, across 4 fiscal years, to reduce $683 million through the Board of Public Works process. So nothing we've done has hamstrung them, despite their claims that it would previously. And finally, although I have great respect for Secretary Brinkley, I wish I had been around to serve with Senator Brinkley, because Senator Brinkley was the lead co-sponsor on legislation in 2012 to not only add a tougher transparency requirement than we have now, a 1-week transparency requirement, but also limit the Board of Public Works budget cutting authority to 10%. Down from the 25% that this bill would maintain. So I think Senator Brinkley got it right. I think this bill gets it right. And I would ask the committee for a favorable report and look forward to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Delegate Corman, for presenting House Bill 133. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the bill sponsor on House Bill 133? Please use the raise hand function. Seeing none, we will next move on to the favorable testimonies. First, we have Ms. Sarah Mick. If you could please provide your testimony. And as a reminder, there's 2 minutes for each testimony. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang and members of the committee. Congratulations, by the way, on the new position, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm Sarah Mirsky-Mickey. I'm the Deputy Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council, which represents the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore and all of its agencies. I'm here today to give our support for HB 133, which would limit both BPW's ability to reduce operating budget items on the line item by a maximum of 25% and increase the number of business days from 3 to 10 that BPW must wait and publish notice before approving proposed reductions. Both of these measures are important to the nonprofit agencies that the Baltimore Jewish Council represents. When planning annual budgets, our agencies do take into account their state funding. By limiting this power to 25% of the total appropriation, our social service organizations can better plan how to use their funding for the clients they serve. Further, HB 133 would give us more time to form a response and advocate against proposed cuts by increasing the number of days of notice from 3 to 10. This is especially important to us as a Jewish organization, since currently notice is given on Fridays, meaning that we only have a few hours on Fridays to begin to get organized and form a response if the proposed cut is to one of our programs we support. And we also miss a day of advocacy because it's during Shabbat. This is best shown by a real-life example from over the summer. Over the summer, the governor proposed a cut to a program important to our community, security funding for religious institutions that are at risk of hate crimes. We had to scramble to get 3 different Jewish organizations to approve the language and sign on a letter asking the governor to withdraw this cut. I don't know if you've ever tried to get several organizations to approve and sign on to a letter, if they're a nonprofit, also getting their boards to approve that language in a matter of hours. It's nearly impossible. Having a few extra days to work with the governor and other members of BPW to advocate against or limit a cut would have been a help and would be a help in the future for all advocacy organizations, but especially organizations like ours that have religious constraints. For these reasons, we ask for a favorable report on HB 133. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mickey. And next we will have for favorables, Benjamin Orr, and if the committee, if they do have questions for the favorable panelists, if we could save them for after when Mr. Benjamin Orr presents. Mr. Benjamin Orr with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. Mr. Orr, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Benjamin Orr. I'm the president and CEO of the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that believes that every Marylander should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared and rising standard of living. With that goal in mind, the state budget is the clearest reflection of our values and priorities as a state. State residents deserve a transparent budget process that empowers them to participate and provides policymakers with the fullest picture of the impact of their decisions on families and communities. That is why the Maryland Center on Economic Policy supports House Bill 133. While this body has made small adjustments recently to the process by which the Board of Public Works can make cuts to the budget, more improvements are necessary. Expanding the required advance notice of any cuts to be considered to 10 days will help make sure the board fully understands how the proposal will affect services Marylanders rely on and enable better understanding of the equity implications of proposed cuts. Further clarifying that the 25% reduction limit applies to the entire fiscal year instead of each meeting individually, and that it applies to the line item, not the agency, will protect BPW's ability to respond to crisis while ensuring that entire programs are not eliminated without this body's review. Passing this bill will increase the level of transparency, fairness, and inclusion in the Maryland state budget development process, and in doing so, maintain appropriate flexibility for BPW. Furthermore, it will likely improve racial, gender, and economic equity statewide. For these reasons, the Maryland Center on Economic Policy respectfully requests that the Appropriations Committee give a favorable report to House Bill 133.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orr, for your presentation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriation Committee for our favorable panelists? Seeing none, thank you very much. And both Mrs. Mickey and also Mr. Orr both have written testimony in addition to their oral testimony. So thank you so much for being here. Next, we will move to the unfavorable panelists. First, we have the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary David Brinkley. Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I trust you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to do the split screen here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm David Brinkley, the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, and with me is Mark Nicole, my Deputy Secretary. Obviously, DBM opposes House Bill 133. You have a very detailed written testimony is in front of you. I'll highlight some parts of it, but I will not read to you. There are a couple parts to the bill, primarily the 10-day advance notice versus the 3-day notice we're currently under, and a restriction to 25% of any line item veto versus the entire appropriation. And honestly, this bill micromanages how things happen when the issue is that it needs to happen in the first place, which generally nobody likes at all. Making mid-year reductions is already a daunting and challenging task. This bill unnecessarily causes further bureaucratic delay. And in fact, Standard & Poor's AAA rating report this past year said, quote, the state's continued practice of making proactive mid-year adjustments to align the budget in case of slower than anticipated revenue growth will remain an important credit factor for the 2-year outlook horizon. The other two credit rating agencies similarly chimed in, applauding Maryland for having sufficient checks and balances throughout the BPW process I'll point out, Mr. Chairman, to the members of your committee also, no other state has a BPW where there's a similar type of weighing in, particularly with your representative as the treasurer. So no other state has that to deal with mid-year unforeseen reductions in an expeditious and responsible manner. Let me clear that back up. So the other two agencies chimed in applauding Maryland for having sufficient checks and balances through this process, through the BPW, to deal with mid-year unforeseen reductions in an expeditious and responsible manner. Paragraphs 3, 4, and 5 of our written testimony highlight details and timelines regarding the 10-day advance notice. I won't read them for you here, but it's very clear as to how we've had that. Since that time that the sponsor referenced, there have only been, I think it's 5 times that DBM has taken mid-year budget reductions to BPW. June 22nd in 2016, November 2nd in 2016, September 6th of 2017, and twice this past year on May 20th and July 1st of 2020. We are unaware of any circumstance where insufficient notice created concerns. The second issue, restricting the reduction authority to 25% for any line item, is tremendously cumbersome by forcing DBM and the agencies to make a greater number of smaller reductions rather than more substantial changes to fewer programs. And I might argue that it might be better not to start a new program, likely preserving existing programs. However, with this level of micromanagement, new program can only be reduced 25% and existing programs get the same attention, which quite possibly may be very destructive to the very mission of what we're trying to do. In fact, typically, we're trying to preserve resources to programs that work. Look to do a haircut to something new or not nearly as effective. This forces across the board reductions to all programs, especially those that work well. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, no one proposes mid-year budget reductions because they are desirable. On the contrary, they are proposed out of necessity to preserve those items determined to have a higher priority or a better efficiency. The professionals in this agency take seriously our unique responsibility to analyze the totality of, in this case, the budget just introduced today, the $49 billion budget, and we make every effort to minimize the negative impact of any budget reductions. So I appreciate the opportunity to present to you. Again, we have written testimony that you should have in front of you that goes into some more details and history on some of the actions that took place, not just in the previous 5 times, but also specifically with this year.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Nicole is also with us. Did Mr. Mark Nicole want to provide any testimony at this time?
I don't have anything in addition to what the secretary said.
Okay. Well, we'll see if there's any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Mr. Mark Nicole? Delegate Carol Krim has a question. Delegate Krim?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So, Mr. Secretary, I listened to your testimony. So you're saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it is the BPW's priorities that you want to protect. Is that correct? When you make reductions, when you would have to make reductions, you're protecting the BPW's priorities, not necessarily the legislature's.
No, I don't think I'm making that statement at all. When we compile ideas for reduction, first off, we have to consider the magnitude of what we're dealing with and then the timeline of when we're dealing with it. So for instance, in this past year, we had some last minute changes that we proposed, which took effect May 20th, because we were in the FY 2020 budget. There were some conversations about deferring some of those, but then they might all get wrapped up with what we would have to deal with 2021. we had to go through the steps of having a pretty safe bottom line on FY20 to then know what steps had to be taken in 21. And we didn't have the window of time here, and yet there had to be a large magnitude of choices presented for the governor's consideration, then come back and try to figure out exactly what that might do at the agency level, and then to get buy-in from the comptroller and the treasurer. In the document that you have in front of you, we took over $600 million of proposed reductions. Now, keep in mind, at the time, we were faced with the $2 billion in the 1 year and perhaps a $4 billion for this year that the budget was just submitted. And the mission was, or the stated goal is, it's easier if agencies and beneficiaries, you had the Jewish community testify and you had the other organization testify. If they can see it coming, that there has to be some type of reduction, it's easier to absorb it over the 12-month window as opposed to a compressed time frame. That was our interest in trying to get some of those things compiled and then out for consideration. Then, I think, like I said, we had $600 and some million that we proposed. Well, we certainly got some pushback from the treasurer and also the comptroller. So therefore, all that you saw presented on the agenda were items that by that point in time, we pretty much had some buy-in on. Now, the other items still remained in our hip pocket for consideration. They wouldn't be necessarily new, but also as the summer went on and the revenue changes came in, we then felt we didn't have to present them in that type of timely fashion. So no, the mission is not so much that we're trying to satisfy BPW's mission. We just have to get BPW buy-in to it. The key to what I think is driving some of the concern here is that also by definition means just one person, or in this instance, the executive, can't just say this is what's going to happen. They have to get buy-in from at least one other constitutional officer in that context.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
I understand that, Mr. Secretary. But when you talk about the budget, you're talking about the buy-in of 188 members of the Maryland General Assembly who represent all areas of the state of Maryland. So it's not just 3 people. And I think that's a little bit of an issue here, that we do have this Board of Public Works. It's made up of 3 officers, and they're given enormous power in regard to what they can cut after we, as the legislature, have agreed on a budget. Now, I understand the emergency situation we had this year, but I think at the same time, I think there could have been an opportunity for the legislature to weigh in here. And I think that may be the way we should go in the future. But Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to take any more time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the gentlelady of Frederick County, for this question. Next, the gentlelady from Howard County will recognize Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this bill has 3 parts. It changes from 25% of overall to 25% of line items. It increases the length of time for notice. And then a third prong is limiting the changes to just 1 a year. Is that correct? I was wondering if you were willing to compromise on any of those, if any of those 3 are easier to work around than the other.
That third part doesn't cause us as much heartburn. Because that's
just once a year is not too bad.
The once a year, because that was an issue that really was fought long and hard under the previous administration. And I think you can navigate what you're going to deal with, depending on the magnitude of what you're trying to deal with. What we're attempting to deal with here is getting into the micro level. And until I left the legislature, came here to this department to see the level of detail that they go into and the labor it takes to get into it, even with computers and spreadsheets, cross-checking and cross-balancing and all that. Your staff does the exact same thing. The work that DLS has to do behind the scenes is staggering. And that's why we end up with our challenges there. The 3-day business notice is something that we opposed before, because certainly it was an impediment on how we could go about and exactly the timing on what we can do. I will tell you, it still causes challenges when we're up against a holiday weekend or something along those lines, or if you have a holiday weekend and then some other interruption in business services up to that point. But the 10 days is entirely too long. And then to say that you're going to bring it down to the program level and that far down really takes away some of the dexterity that an agency might need, or that the budget committee might need, or that this agency might need in saying, look, this program is working very well. This other one might be a brand new program, yet we're required to put some funding into it. And by all accounts, you all know that many times the first year startups might have an awful lot of upfront costs that nothing really gets kicked out onto the street, or nothing is really delivered. There's no deliverables at that point in time. It's all startup. So the theory is, look, let's keep something that's going. Let's take a haircut on something else, and something that's brand new that we hadn't had for decades and decades, that can be deferred another year as we keep our core circumstances. But when you do a 25%, equal down to the program level and all that stuff, then everything, and you sacrifice to the point of really delivering efficient services at that point.
I that was my sense that could be very problematic. It's interesting to me that when it comes to budget cutting in general, one of the reasons that people will go to the line item, the 25%, everybody suffers the same, is because they can't make decisions about which part should be cut. But I don't think anyone favors the idea of just a sort of a blanket type cut of 25%. That one would really cause me some.
That's very problematic, and I point out, just as an adjunct to what was said earlier from Delegate Krim. Keep in mind, yes, the BPW has a lot of power up there. One of those 3 votes is selected by you, and honestly, the House of Delegates, over and above the Senate, chooses who the treasurer is. You outvote everyone else. Well, you got the 3-1 for say. So that's your person that's up there and certainly has a say. And when we meet with her, we've had some we've had some phenomenal conversations where she's given us some proposed feedback or something like that, that maybe hasn't been able to be introduced at that point in time, but we've been able to incorporate it in some later considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Kittleman. Next, we have a question from the gentleman from Garrett County, Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Brinkley, how you doing?
Snowing out there?
It is a major storm out there. I think we got about 6 like still coming.
I got an email where we have liberal leave for state employees in Garrett County today. So.
Yeah, I have a question of it. Oh, nice office, by the way. Looks good.
Thank you.
The presenter of the bill made a point that when you were secretary, you supported legislation of this nature and was a sponsor. Now you're on the other side of the fence. Could you explain maybe why your position has changed on this?
Well, keep in mind that was also the point in time under the previous administration where they were doing 25%, then coming back and 25%, then coming back and making the advocacy for another 25%. So yeah, there was some hard battles being fought between the executive and the legislature at that time. But we weren't trying to get into the micromanaging at the level. We were trying to slow up some of the impact and how it would affect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Delegate Beitzel. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Secretary Brinkley or Commissioner Cole? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today. Everybody have a great day. That ends the bill hearing.
Stay safe.
That ends the bill hearing for House Bill 133. We will now move to House Bill 251, which is sponsor only. Delegate Carr, Maryland Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, non-budgeted state agencies. Delegate Carr, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, I'm Delegate Al Carr, and I'm here to present House Bill 251, which would result in better disclosure of vendor spending by state agencies. Maryland already has a public webpage containing a searchable database of state spending for expenditures of at least $25,000. And that's because in 2008, the General Assembly enacted the Maryland Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act. House Bill 251 would make that existing database even better in two ways. Number one, it would add missing agencies such as the Maryland Transportation Authority and others that are considered non-budgeted agencies. And number two, it would improve the speed at which the spending data is disclosed. Under the current system, spending is disclosed January 1st of each year for the previous fiscal year. That means that the data is at least 6 months old and can be up to 30 months old. House Bill 251 would require the spending data to be updated monthly. That way, the data would be no more than 45 days old. It is identical to House Bill 71 of 2020, which passed this committee and passed the House. I ask for your favorable report.
Thank you very much, Delegate Carr, for presenting the bill. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Delegate Carr? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Carr, for being here. That concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 251. Next, we will move to House Bill 310, Delegate Learman, Maryland Arts Capital Grant Program. Delegate Learman, thank you for being here whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks for having me. Happy Inauguration Day to all of you Appropriations Committee members and friends. Gosh, my fellow classmates from class of 2015. You're starting to be outnumbered. But I'm really pleased to be here and to bring back this bill this year. It's in a slightly modified form. You heard it last year and it was passed out of the Senate, but did not advance from this committee. This year, I ask that you grant it a favorable report. So, and there will be a couple of small amendments that are coming your way too. But first, what is this bill about? It's about our arts organizations, and our arts organizations are in a much different place than they were this time last year. Most of them are really in dire straits. I don't know if there's any other industry that's been hit as hard just across the board as our arts organizations, especially the smaller ones. In a recent study utilizing data from the Maryland Department of Commerce and the Maryland State Arts Council, the art sector's total economic loss to date caused by the pandemic has been over $135 million. We've lost 21,000 jobs from the arts sector, contractually hired artists, creative workers, staff. It's been just devastating. And I think these figures really project a long-term struggle for some of these arts organizations. So this bill, amended from last year slightly, is about ensuring that we get those arts organizations back on their feet and that they have the capital funding that they need to get going. And this year, unlike last year, this is focused on our smaller arts organizations. So within the Maryland State Arts Council, there's two levels of organizations. There's over $3 million, which are like the Baltimore Museum of Art, BSO, and others. And then there's the under $3 million organizations. This bill is now all about those small to mid-size, those under $3 million organizations. They're the ones who can't afford a lobbyist to try to get in the governor's budget or can't work a bond initiative necessarily. But in order to be accessible to all patrons, in order to update their facilities for programming, in order to have any chance at growth at all, or to keep their doors open, they need capital funding. So this bill gives them a way to get there through a much more meritocratic and inclusive process. It creates the Maryland Arts Capital Program, which is a competitive grant program for arts institutions in Maryland, and it will be administered by the group that knows all of these arts institutions very well and provides some technical assistance already, the Maryland State Arts Council. It will allocate $3 million to the program every year from FY23 to FY28. And those who are awarded have to match at least 25% to show that they're viable and that they can do this. we all face increasingly tight capital budgets, and our institutions are competing for fewer and fewer dollars. So I believe, and I'm sure you do too, that we have to make sure the dollars go to the organizations that need them, not just those who are most politically connected. We have to make sure there's dedicated funding for these small and mid-sized arts organizations so that they can continue to serve our neighborhoods, our communities, our families, our friends. I'll just note, this is a sponsor-only bill hearing, but I'd just like to thank the 27 organizations from across the state who wrote in with testimony. You have everything from Joe's Movement Emporium to the Garrett County Arts Council to the Howard County Center for the Arts, Bach in Baltimore, Queen Anne's County Center for the Arts, and more. So a huge thank you to them, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions, and I ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Learman. We have a question from the gentlelady from Howard County, Delegate Kettleman.
Thank you. That was a very good presentation on behalf of the arts, but I'm a little confused. This bill this time is so much, according to your testimony, focusing on the problems relating to the pandemic. And with that, I have an issue of singling out the arts industry. I kind of think restaurants and some of the other industries might give it a run for its money as to how much they have suffered and lost jobs and businesses because of the pandemic. And I would think that the proper place for them to be compensated would be as part of whatever package we put together for really the issues of COVID. You're right, we do have very limited funds, and creating a $3 million mandate, I suspect is something that I just don't think that we can afford it. I think there's so many people, individuals out there who have been suffering, who are losing jobs, who can't get their unemployment insurance, that have to come before new programs. So that's my 2 cents.
Is there a question?
Yes, isn't it so?
No, actually, I guess I got to say, Delegate Kittleman, there are so many institutions and organizations and companies around the state that are hurting right now. As you know, because you've been on this committee, this is a bill that I've brought in the past. So this bill is not just about the pandemic. My intent was to remind everybody that our arts institutions are in a unique position and that many of them cannot be open at all. Like, they haven't opened since March, and they are really hurting. And so to make sure that we can buoy them like we should, like I wanted to do last year, it's even more urgent now, I think, to make sure that they can stay open, that they can reopen after the pandemic, and that they can continue to thrive and hire back all those 27,000 people who've been laid off. I think there are certainly, I have a lot of restaurants and businesses in my district who I've been working with. I have 3 Main Street districts in my district alone. So I'm very well aware of the dire straits that many restaurants and businesses are in this year. It's been so difficult. This bill, which I brought last year, is about our arts institutions and what they do for our communities and the economic vitality that they bring to our Main Street programs and into our communities and neighborhoods, I don't think can be overstated. So while this program is about our arts institutions, if you have a bill that's about supporting some of our other institutions, which are not nonprofits, I'll note, these are nonprofit organizations, I'd be delighted to see that bill, but I hope that answers your question about why arts organizations. Thank you.
I just don't understand. It would be much more palatable to me if it didn't have that $3 million mandate on it, because that to me takes it out of the realm of, a helping hand and more into the realm of a brand new program. But I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Sure. And if there was a grant program without any money, it wouldn't be much help.
There's a difference between 3 million and nothing.
Any other questions I can answer for folks? It's great to see all your lovely faces, even though it's on Zoom. I'm sorry I don't have my usual 5 panels full of people to tell you about my bill today.
We're going to move on to the next question from the gentlelady from Prince George's County, Delegate Valentina Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. It's good to see you, Delegate Learman, and I do remember the bill and your 5 panels from last. My concern that I just want to start to highlight it as we're out of the bat here is, I'm concerned, and I know our fiscal note writers are working really hard, but $97,000 for a one-time coordinator to manage this may be a job that I'll have to apply for, but I am concerned. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Delegate Lehrman, that bumping the bill up to 3.1 based on hiring someone at $97,000 for a one-time coordinator seems a bit high, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my internet connection, but I missed a lot of what you said. You said something about hiring somebody for $91,000. I don't.
No, I'm sorry. Let me know too, because I've got a bill hearing if my internet connection's not working. Mr. Vice Chair, could you?
No, it could be me.
Okay.
Could you repeat your question, Delegate Valentina Smith?
Just the fiscal note brings concern to me because I'm concerned that it's overestimating the project manager. It's stating that it's $97,000 for a one-time person to coordinate this program. And just as the Appropriations Committee, I'm suggesting that we look at these and question whether or not they're overestimating the cost to administer the bill.
Right. Yes, I agree with you, Delegate. Thank you for that. I think that is probably an overestimate. I also think, one of the things we noted in the statute is that there are other competitive grant programs around the state that already exist, like through DHCD, the Bernie program, or the NED program for the DC suburbs. And so I think we want the Maryland State Arts Council to be able to use the knowledge of programs that already exist, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, I think that should bring down the cost of administration as well.
Pick up from Dundalk. City of Baltimore is recognized. Delegate Tony Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Delegate Lehrman, for bringing this back up and for your sort of amendments that you put together. The question, you sort of answered the question that I had. It was really about who was eligible. And I know you said that these are for like smaller nonprofits. And I'm just thinking about the ones like that I am aware of so my question is, could it be for an organization for improvements for an organization that might not have arts like as their title, but they provide sort of an arts program for students in Baltimore City who don't have arts within their school setting? So could it be for an organization like that, or do they have to specifically only focus on the arts?
Sure, good question. I don't know. You could tell me what you're talking about.
But there are some organizations that there are some organizations that make like art with a heart, for example.
Yes. So organizations that are within there's a grants for organizations program that's part of the Maryland State Arts Council. And there's a big list of them on the State Arts Council website. Any of those institutions that are under that $3 million threshold would be eligible. There's also an amendment that I'm going to offer to you all. We're just getting it drafted, that would expand that to small nonprofits that are, like you said, maybe like the Jewish Museum or Great Blacks in Wax, that are not necessarily arts organizations, but they're small cultural institutions that do arts programming. So they're not necessarily part of the Maryland State Arts Council grants for organizations, but they do arts programming as a part of their mission sometimes. So there will be an amendment coming your way with that as well.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Gentleman from Montgomery County is recognized. Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Lehrman, I want to see if maybe we can characterize this in a different way, and I want to see if you agree with me. I understand, obviously, with COVID, with the pandemic and unemployment as it is, a lot of people are suffering. We have massive unemployment. We have businesses who are losing revenue and potentially closing. And every aspect of our economy is important. But I see this bill as something that contributes to sustaining our economy rather than takes away from small businesses. And whereas we are seeing the governor proposing a moratorium on sales tax, which clearly helps businesses that collect sales tax, i.e. businesses that sell things. We see a moratorium on unemployment insurance for those companies and organizations that have actually fired people in this pandemic. What we are not seeing is assistance to nonprofit organizations that have chosen to go into reserves to not fire their people and provide value to our economy through things other than selling things like food and gadgets and gizmos. This is also a bill that contributes to our economy, is it not?
Yes, absolutely, Delegate Resnick. I think that's absolutely correct. Our arts organizations have a huge impact on our economic growth and on the economy in the state of Maryland, and tens of millions of dollars and every year that they contribute. And just thinking about in my district, we have the Creative Alliance and the American Visionary Arts Museum, and they bring in hundreds and hundreds of people to those neighborhoods that then visit the restaurants, visit the shop in the stores, stay in hotels. And when they're closed, it kills the local economy. And so we want to make sure that those organizations can grow, can reopen, and can grow, moving forward. So absolutely, thank you. I agree, Delegate.
Great. Questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 310?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question. My hand was raised. I'm not sure if you see that or not. It's Delegate Rice.
Delegate Grice, go ahead.
Delegate Lehrman, I couldn't let you leave without asking a question. My apologies.
I thought that was a high five sign, Delegate Rice. I didn't know you were raising your hand, man.
Normally it's a high five, but I do have an important question for you. As you know, there are a lot of funding sources out there for our arts already. So my question has to do with the duplication of services. And also too, as you're very much aware too, there's a large number of agencies in the arts where we fund in our bond bill requests as well. So is it really, why is it necessary to basically create a new line item in the budget specifically for the arts when there's already, like the local management board, you mentioned a few already, Bernie. What is it necessary? Because I'm just very reluctant on adding new line items in the budget when there's other services out there, where funding sources out there that are very readily available, and we have a history of funding those things. And if we feel like it's underfunded, why not go through the budget process and just increase the line items in those other, like I said, the local management boards, they always need more money. And I know that the arts do go to the LMBs quite often for funding.
Thank you for that question. So this bill is about making sure that the process for getting funding is more inclusive and meritocratic. It's also, I think, about making sure that these smaller organizations that don't know how to do the local bond initiative process, or don't know how to get into the governor's budget, or maybe there's no room for them because there's a bunch of other organizations that the delegate or senator are focused on getting money to, that they don't get squeezed out. So for arts organizations right now, there is operating money through the Maryland State Arts Council, but no capital money. And Bernie and Ned are they're not about arts organizations. They are about community development programs in general. So think rehabbing storefronts. Could they go to arts organizations? They could, but they're competing. Those arts organizations are competing against every other possible, community development project or plan in that area. Also, Bernie and Ned don't cover your district.
Right.
They don't cover Garrett County.
Yeah, I only mentioned that because you did.
Yeah, but I'm just, there are, I think, limited number of options for capital funding. That was the big hole that the arts organizations expressed to me and Citizens for the Arts and others, that it's very difficult. And this isn't always necessarily about expanding. Sometimes it's really hard to fundraise for a new roof, right? But in order to keep operating, you need a new roof. Right. So this is about making sure that we're helping those organizations get in line through the Maryland State Arts Council, through a grant program where there's somebody who can evaluate whether they're ready for the funds, whether it's a proposal that merits action, right? Whether this is just we're just, this isn't something just slapped together. This is something they really need and it will help them through the Maryland State Arts Council rather than through us. Like when somebody's bond initiative comes through, I don't know if it's the right thing to fund or not, right? So this is about making sure that they're working in a system that's done more inclusively and in a more meritocratic way. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a follow-up question to that? But that's what we like to do to really gauge our neighborhoods and to gauge our district and to prioritize, one project over another. I mean, that's what our constituency expects of us, though, right? Again, I guess my question is this absolutely necessary when we're doing that already, when we are prioritizing all these different projects? And it's important to prioritize them because not every single project it merits funding. It doesn't.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Not every, but I don't. So I guess two things. So first is one of the amendments that's coming to you is that every institution who applies for a capital for one of these grants needs to have a letter of support from one of their delegates or a senator, just to make sure that, first of all, there's no double dipping, right? So that you as a delegate know, okay, look, they already applied for this funding, so maybe there's somebody else who should get bond funding this year, right? And to make sure that you're involved in the process as well. But also applying for a grant through an organization like the Maryland State Arts Council that knows what you as an organization, what your capacity is, the work that you've been doing, can help you along the way versus applying through, the local bond initiative process or through the governor's budget that requires knowledge of the Annapolis process, requires you to come to Annapolis or be on Zoom or, it's a very different process. And I think what we'll see is that arts organizations who apply through the Maryland State Arts Council are actually able to use that money better and use it in a way that is more efficient because they are working hand in glove with the Maryland State Arts Council to do that. And so I actually think that this will enable our smaller arts organizations not only to have certainty that there is a place to get some funding, but also to be able to spend it in a way that's more efficient for them and for the state. Thanks.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee for House Bill 310? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Lehman, for being here. Have a great rest of the session.
My pleasure. Great to see you all. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
This ends the hearing for House Bill 310. Next, we will move on to House Bill 258, which is sponsor only. Delegate Guyton, State Child Welfare System Reporting. Delegate Guyton, thank you for being here. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's great to see so many colleagues and friends on appropriations. It feels like it's been forever. I'm Delegate Michelle Guyton, District 42B. And I thank you for your consideration, or actually your reconsideration of House Bill 258, State Child Welfare System Reporting. This bill was introduced last session as HB 986, and it's presented to you today in its final version that received a favorable report from this committee and passed the House unanimously last session. HB 258 requires the sharing of well-publicized, transparent data regarding the educational outcomes and experiences of the children who are involved in our child welfare system. HB 258 fills the important informational gaps that we have about the educational progress of foster youth by requiring the inclusion of additional educational related data points in the annual DHS Child Welfare Performance Indicators Report. So I just want to note this is already required by statute. We're not asking for a new report. We are only adding data to that report. So these data points include stability of school placements, placements of sibling groups, whether they have special education needs, which youth have been retained, absenteeism, and their school disciplinary information. So these data also have to be disaggregated by race and ethnicity to ensure that there are no racial disparities in outcomes for foster children in Maryland. So I urge this committee to again issue a favorable report on this bill to provide increased transparency and accountability, and also to enable us to better assess programs and progress and evaluate how to meet the needs of the children and families involved in Maryland's child welfare system. I do want to point out that I think that this is more important than ever this year when families and social safety nets and educational systems have been stressed so greatly. This bill is supported by Advocates for Children and Youth, Morgan State School of Social Work, Adoptions Together, Maryland Association of Resources for Family and Youth, and Maryland Legal Aid. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Delegate Guyton, for presenting House Bill 258. The gentlelady from Howard County is recognized. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. I wondered if this, we have this longitudinal study, I don't know the exact name of it, but that collects every piece of information known to man about kids from the time they get to school till what, 25 years after they finish school. Is this information to go into that data system, or is it a different kind of system that it would go into?
Thank you so much, Delegate Kittleman, for that question, because I love the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. It's one of my favorite things about our state, actually, because I'm a little bit of a data nerd to begin with. I would love to see this information included in that system, and that's something that we have been working towards in our committee, but it is not yet included. So and that's something that has to pass through statute, and it has not yet passed through statute. I believe we may be trying again this year, but I'm not sure. So
it would be, but you would still want it to be collected in its own different program? I mean,
well, we're really looking at two different things. So the Maryland Longitudinal, I won't take up too much of your time, but the Maryland Longitudinal Data System has limited availability for some of this information right now. So every time we add a new data point to that, we have to go through statute. So to get the information that we're asking for in this bill, it would probably take a long time to get all of it there and included. But yes, I would also love to see a data point specifically for foster youth and homeless youth in the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. And if that comes before any of us, I hope we'll vote for it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee for House Bill 258? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Guyton, for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Next, we will hear House Bill 26, and that is sponsored by Delegate Lopez. And this afternoon, it's actually a bill that is jointly assigned to Judiciary and Appropriations. And this afternoon, we have joining us from the Judiciary Committee are Delegate Fisher, Delegate Williams, and Delegate Griffith. So thank you to our colleagues for being here today. Delegate Lopez, you're presenting House Bill 26, Action to Collect a Private Education Loan Required Documents. Delegate Lopez, whenever you're ready.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a slide presentation to share. So I'll enable a share screen.
Please.
There we go. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and delegates in the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Leslie Lopez, and I'm asking for your support for HB 26. This bill bans the use of mass-produced documentation, also known as robo-signing, by requiring that debt collectors show that private student loan debts are valid when attempting to collect. This bill passed favorably in ECM last year in nearly the same posture. Right now, ad hoc trusts can purchase private student loan debts and go to a Maryland courthouse with little more than an Excel sheet of names, and then legally obtain wage garnishments on debts that are simply no longer owed. The pandemic has not stopped this exploitative practice either. In fact, almost every member of this committee has had constituents involved in one of these unsubstantiated cases last year alone. The National Collegiate Student Loan Trust, just one of these creditors, owned more than 15,000 loans owed by Maryland borrowers, totaling more than $190 million. The federal government has ordered this trust to pay over $20 million for its deceptive practices in the past. An analysis shows of these court filings shows that this creditor alone has filed more than 1,300 cases against Marylanders in the past 5 years. More than half of these lawsuits are against borrowers in majority minority zip codes, including Montgomery and Prince George's counties and Baltimore City. And 25.9% of all lawsuits analyzed were filed in Prince George's County alone, which, as this committee knows, was the center of Maryland's foreclosure crisis a decade ago. And I'd like to draw your attention to this slide in particular, because here you will see the number of National Collegiate Student Loan Trust cases in your individual districts. Please know that these are only the cases that we could confirm using zip codes, and that there are likely more, and some of them will overlap with the districts of your neighboring districts. Because more than 90% of private student loans require cosigners, parents and grandparents are frequently defaulting. According to AARP, 27% of student borrowers over 65 are in default. Not only is the potential to retire put at risk, many of these senior citizens are already on a fixed income and have benefits that are highly susceptible to wage garnishment. So to sum it up, borrowers only take out private student loans as a last resort when their federal options are gone. They are among the most economically vulnerable students in higher education and have very few protections. I urge you to support this bill and ensure that borrowers in Maryland do not fall victim to predatory and unsubstantiated lawsuits.
Very much, Delegate Lopez. Is that your presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the committee or visiting colleagues for Delegate Lopez on this bill? The gentlelady from Howard County is recognized. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you once again. I like the what is behind the bill, but I'm a little bit confused as to what you're saying. The practice is trying to recover money that isn't owed, versus you're trying to protect people who actually owe the money, are not at that point able to pay it. So that is my question first. And my second question is, as a lawyer, maybe my formerly fellow colleagues from judiciary can weigh in on this, but courts have rules and regulations as to what evidence is good for what. And I'm curious as to why the courts are ruling the way they are. What is it about the evidence that's coming in that convinces them, but that is really not that good?
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Delegate, for your question. There's going to be some testimony from attorneys who practice in this type of law, so they can give you more examples of specific instances that I think would be helpful for you. But ultimately, what's happening is that there's the burden is just to come with a list of names and addresses of people who have defaulted that you claim. There's no dates that are required of like origination of these loans. There's no dates suggesting when these loans, the loans went into default. There's no specific amount that's listed in these that required documents that trusts are specifically required to do. In the previous year in Economic Matters, we introduced the bill to include banks and credit unions, and the bill is now tailored specifically to trusts because banks and credit unions already have that information at their disposal, so it hasn't been an issue with credit unions and banks. It's really an issue with these ad hoc trusts that are set up to buy bad debt.
So is it maybe what you're saying is it's in the original document that the borrower signs that gives up rights for certain things?
No, I think there in general, there's just different protections that federal student loan debt has that are different than private student loan debt, right? So federal student loan debt has a locked-in rate. It's not based on your credit score. Private student loans are based on your credit score. But there's a certain limit to federal loans. Once you hit that limit and you still need to pay for your school, then you need to look at private options. And so it's basically treated like consumer debt, except for it has the negative part of student loan debt and that it cannot be discharged in a bankruptcy. So for private borrowers are already economically vulnerable because they can't come up with the money otherwise, and then there's no protections in place for them.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Montgomery County is recognized, Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That actually brings up a unique scenario that I don't know if this legislation addresses. So let me bring it up and see how you feel about it. There is a cadre of student loan debt that started out as federal, but in the early 90s, the federal government passed legislation allowing the refinancing of federal student loans into private loans in order to secure lower interest rates. I know this because I happen to have one of these loans. So in that case, would a loan like that under your legislation be considered federal because it started out as a federal loan, or is it considered private because it is now in private hands as a result of federal legislation?
From my understanding, and perhaps the witnesses that come later will be able to clarify with a little bit more precision on this, but my understanding is kind of where the loan lands is how it's classified. So if you refinance a federal loan to something that's private, you lose all the benefits of that federal loan. That's one of the issues of refinancing federal loans. It's one of the reasons why you usually shouldn't unless you can get a really good, a lower interest rate. Right now, interest rates are very low, so your interest rate might be lower for a private student loan debt than a federal one, but you run the risk of having none of the protections of a federal loan.
Great, thank you, Delegate Resnick. Are there any other questions from members of the committee for the bill sponsor? Seeing none, this afternoon we have joining with us witnesses who are favorably supporting this legislation. First, I'd like to recognize Christopher Medallo with the Office of the Attorney General of Maryland Consumer Protection Division, providing both written and oral testimony. And also we have Seth Frotman with the Student Bar Protection Center, and also Kathleen Hyland, National Association of Consumer Advocates. If we could have each of the witnesses provide their testimonies, and at the end of the last one who provides their testimonies, then we'll take questions from the committee. To the witnesses, you have 2 minutes each, and as a reminder, there'll be a sound when that 2 minutes is up, and we'll just ask you to summarize at that time. So at this time, Christopher Medallo, please proceed.
Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you. My name is Christopher Medallo. I'm Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division of the Maryland Attorney General's Office. My office supports this bill. This is a good consumer protection bill because it helps to protect Maryland borrowers from unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices in the collection of their private student loans that are owned or collected upon by bad acting debt buyers, trusts, and other non-bank companies. So to answer that last question, absolutely, it's my understanding that if it's then owned by a company that got your loan because you refinanced it and it's not a state or the federal government, it's a private loan, it would be applicable to this law. Private student loans, most times, other than the refis, are often owed by folks who obviously need additional assistance paying for college on top of any federal loans they might take out. Usually you take federal loans first because, as Doug Lopez mentioned, they have the best terms. So therefore, it's usually people who aren't able, their families aren't usually able to save for college. Maybe they're first-time college goers, often people of color, often students of for-profit colleges, especially the expensive or the predatory institutions. My office has seen many of those students with private student loans. And these are students whose often loans parents have to co-sign them. Federal government loans don't need that. And this means the parents may also be responsible for paying for those loans. These are borrowers who have been acutely, of course, affected by the current economic recession brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, these students have not been given any assistance by the federal government in any way, certainly not the pause of loan payments that federal borrowers have. These loans are often aggressively collected on, as was discussed. Oftentimes when lawsuits are filed upon these students, they get boilerplate complaints. So very little of the documents that these loan holders are actually required to have, many of them by federal law, often required to have, they're not put forward in the legislation, in the lawsuit. So this provides proactive protections. And most of the documents these companies should have if they actually own the loan. So these are things they should be able to provide.
Thank you.
And
if you could summarize, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. The last thing is these are something that they should have, and that's why my office supports it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Medeo. Next, if we could hear from Mr. Seth Frotman, Student Borrower Protection Center.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Chang, members of the committee. My name is Seth Frotman, and I am the Executive Director of the Student Borrower Protection Center and the former CFPB Student Loan Ombudsman. I was in Annapolis last year as the House worked to advance this bill before COVID struck. This bill was critical then, and it is even more so now. Just last week, my organization, along with MCRC, AFT Maryland, and SEIU Local 500, exposed how predatory student loan companies were hauling borrowers into court to collect on dubious student debt. This unfortunately follows a decade-long pattern of abuse, rivaling the worst of the mortgage crisis. These companies are exploiting the court system in every county in this state, but particularly Baltimore and Prince George's counties. In the last 2 weeks alone, as COVID cases reached record highs, 8 more of these cases have been filed just by this one company. Critically, this bill is not giving a handout. It is simply making sure people only have to repay what they actually owe. Nothing more, nothing less. And as industry uses this pandemic as a chance to make a quick buck, now is the time to act. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have on the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frotman. Next, we will hear from Ms. Kathleen Highland, National Association of Consumer Advocates. Ms. Highland, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kat Highland, and I'm here on behalf of the National Association of Consumer Advocates, a nonprofit corporation whose members are public and private sector attorneys, legal services attorneys, professors, law students, and others with a focus on consumer protection. I'm also the president of the Maryland Consumer Right Coalition's Board of Directors, and I have a private practice in Annapolis, so I'm waving you to from the other side of the water here in Eastport, or wherever you are. And I practice student loan law in addition to other areas of consumer protection. I testified before the House Economic Matters Committee last year on this legislation because we had a sense that student loan debt, private student loan debt, was worsening and that we would see many abuses in our court system. Well, I'm here to report today that those abuses and our fears have come true, and that in addition to handling many national collegiate debt lawsuits, which I've done for about 6 to 8 years now, I've also just started litigating student loan solutions lawsuits, which are formerly Bank of America owned debts that my clients here in Maryland took out in 2006 that have just made their way to Maryland courts, stopping along the way in the hands of many debt collectors. And what we're seeing is a slew of lawsuits that are just ridden with untruths. And in fact, my colleague Peter Holland and I just filed the first class action on this issue, which is now pending in federal court in Maryland, against these borrowers and their in and out of state attorneys who cannot prove the source of this debt and the payments that have been made along the way. What they're doing is terrible. They're taking very little evidence, creating false affidavits, and swearing that these debts are re-aged, brought back to life, ignoring all of the collection attempts that have happened for the past 6 to 8 years and putting that burden on the consumers themselves to prove. This is very difficult, especially because Bank of America doesn't have any records for files older than 7 years that they've sold. Now you ask Delegate, why are these cases being pushed through the courts? And that is because on their faces, they're very confusing. They appear to be uniform, and they have documents from places like the SEC and complete fabrications from the companies that are filing the cases that look official. So it's very difficult for the consumer to go back in time, find all their old debt collection notices, and prove to the court that these are dishonest lawsuits. So there's a high burden out there for consumers. House Bill 26 would make this a lot easier because it would require evidence up front. And from a firsthand perspective and someone who's litigating this now, I strongly urge a favorable position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Highland, for your testimony. Are there any questions from members of the committee for this panel? If there are any questions, please use the raise hand function. Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Lopez, and to all the members of the panel for being here today. Very much appreciated. And also want to thank our visiting colleagues from the House Judiciary Committee, for your testimony, Delegate Williams and Delegate Griffith for all being here today. This concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 26. Next, we will move to
someone who's litigating this now, I strongly urge a favorable position. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Highland, for your.
Okay, if you could ever just a reminder to have yourself on mute.
Delegate Williams.
Okay, next we will hear House Bill 59, Delegate Pena-Melnick, Task Force on Higher Education Students with Chronic Health Conditions. Delegate Pena-Melnick, please proceed when
Thank
you're
you
ready.
very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chairman Chang and members of the Appropriations Committee. It's an honor to be with you here today. Thank you for allowing me to present House Bill 59. House Bill 59 passed the House unanimously in 2018. And I want to take a minute to thank Delegate Aruna Miller for her work. House Bill 59 creates a task force on higher education students with chronic health conditions. It will study existing publicly available data on undergraduate and graduate students with chronic health conditions at institutions of higher education in our state. It is not proposing any programs or expenditures. It will look at what are the issues and potential path forward. These students that the task force will be studying have a lot of support when they're in school in K through 12. However, when they arrive to college, there isn't anything for them. They're forgotten. And I believe that we all benefit when each of us can achieve our full potential. And the fiscal note actually says that MHIC advises that it can staff the task force with existing resources. And I would respectfully ask for a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Delegate Pena-Melnick. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Delegate Pena-Melnick on this bill? Seeing none, we will move next to witnesses who are in favor of this bill. We have several. So what we'll do is we will hear from the favorable panelists first, and then we have favorable with amendments. If we could hold our questions until we have the group of each of the panels go forward with their testimony. First, we have favorable, Santi Bhagat with the physician parent givers. Santi, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice
And just
Chair.
as a you're welcome. Just as a reminder to all the witnesses that we have a 2-minute limit and there should be a sound that'll indicate when that 2 minutes is up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Committee, for hearing my testimony today. I am Santhi Bhagat. I'm a physician and mother of a young adult who grew up with a chronic health condition. I founded Physician Parent Caregivers, a nonprofit dedicated to quality healthcare and quality of life for an estimated 20 million young Americans with chronic conditions. Historically overlooked and ignored, they call themselves young invisibles. You may be wondering why this population is invisible and overlooked. Advances in medicine and technology now enable over 90% of teens with chronic conditions to survive into adulthood. It is a miracle the world did not expect. As a result, adult medicine, higher education, government, and society did not prepare to receive these young people, and they exist now in every community. At least 1 in 4 young adults grows up with a childhood condition, and many more develop them in young adulthood. COVID-19 is highlighting disparities that young invisibles face. A recent analysis shows that their risk of death is 13 times higher than their healthy peers. Senator Chris Van Hollen has written 2 letters to the CDC, and he is most concerned about college students with chronic conditions. Colleges need to identify, track, and support their students with chronic conditions. They need to have policies, programs, and services to help these students. Since data are lacking on the prevalence, supports, and outcomes, we are in the dark. In this COVID pandemic, how are colleges informing and protecting their students with chronic conditions? I'd like to refer to 2 articles about college health centers. The first is a Washington Post investigative report that shows many colleges have numerous incidents of morbidity and mortality when students experience acute or chronic illnesses. Another is an article in the Journal of Pediatrics that says most college health centers are capable of providing primary care for students with chronic conditions. Clearly, this is an urgent unmet need for millions of students. Just like other students, they are in a vulnerable life phase. Many supports could be in place to help them stay on track and graduate, but they are not. So these students often suffer, get poor grades, or drop out. Bill Gates has pointed out that the US has an extremely high dropout rate of 45%. We need to know how many are young invisibles. College graduates earn 65% and they're at risk for medical bankruptcy. So they really need to have some sort of income assurance.
Thank you, Dr. Bhagat. Just as, if you could summarize, thank you, Dr. Bhagat.
Well, this is not just about health and educational equity. We have a moral imperative to help these young visibles be in optimal health and succeed in higher education. And this bill is really important so we can get an essential first picture for this population. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhagat, and members of the committee. Dr. Bhagat has also submitted written testimony. Next, we will hear from Mr. Gregory Schuckman, who is providing oral testimony today. Mr. Schuckman.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang, members of the House Appropriations Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify this afternoon in support of HB 59, which would establish a task force that will look at how we can best serve students who live with chronic conditions in our state's colleges and universities. As a former MEC commissioner under Governor O'Malley, who served as the co-chair of Maryland's 2013-2017 State Plan for Higher Education, and as someone who's worked in higher education for over 20 years, I have firsthand experience working with our colleges and universities in Maryland. As someone who has been living with multiple sclerosis for over 20 years and who is the past chair of the Greater Washington, Maryland chapter of the National MS Society, I can certainly relate to people who have chronic health conditions. And as a 6-year doctoral student at the University of Florida, I think I check all the boxes for this target population in the legislation. You may think that Delegate Penumelnik brought me in as a ringer for the bill, but I assure you we've never spoken before. I should point out that I'm a current appointee of Governor Hogan to the Maryland Education Council, which is the body that represents our state before the Education Commission on the states. Incidentally, I got to know Maryland through Speaker Jones when I first served as an ECS commissioner when I lived in Virginia. And she was a wonderful mentor for me, and I will miss serving with her on ECS. With respect to building an awareness and understanding of people who live with chronic health conditions and the challenges they face in higher education, according to the National Center for College Students with Disabilities, 19% of undergraduates in our nation have some form of disability. When we look at attainment rates, the Census Bureau reports that people with disabilities nationally have baccalaureate attainment rates at less than half as much as those who do not have a disability, 20.4% versus 42.8%. If you add students who have some college or an associate's degree to that attainment rate, students with disabilities are still below 50%. Since Maryland has a college attainment goal of 55% by 2025, we cannot afford to leave any group of students behind. So finding ways that will increase attainment rates for students with chronic health conditions is essential if we're going to reach that goal. As a doctoral student, I can tell you that the only reason that the University of Florida knows that I have a disability is because I registered with their Office of Disability Services at the suggestion of one of my faculty members following a serious car accident that I had in Howard County in 2018. There will be significant challenges to identifying students with chronic health conditions, particularly with HIPAA, and the fact that students with chronic health conditions often suffer from the stigma and may not want to disclose their illness. Our colleges and universities do not have a mechanism for collecting this information, nor do institutions receive additional funding to provide necessary supports to students with disabilities. So there will be costs to our colleges and universities to provide the services and supports to make these students successful. I know that the task force will address these questions and avail themselves of the data that already exists, and believe that their contribution to understanding the size and scope of what needs to be done to ensure students with chronic health conditions are successful in higher education will be time well spent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shuckman. Next, we will hear from Ms. Kara Purdy, Invisible Wave Movement. Ms. Purdy.
Okay, thank you so much. So my name is Kara Purdy. I'm a lifelong Maryland resident and member of the Invisible Wave, a group of young adults with chronic conditions trying to spread awareness of our healthcare and social needs in the world. I'd like to use my time to give a brief background of my chronic illness and confront the discrepancy of university disability accommodations with accommodations available in the workplace. I have a rare congenital connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The symptoms of this disease include chronic pain, brain fog, heart issues, frequent joint dislocations, and chronic fatigue. As I grew up, my symptoms got progressively worse. During flare-ups of the disease, I had an extremely difficult time having the energy to do the most basic tasks. I was diagnosed at 21 years old, a college senior, after seeing more than 10 different specialist doctors. After high school, I went to the University of Maryland to study bioengineering in the Honors College. Without an official diagnosis for what I was going through, I was not able to receive any accommodations through the university. I was frequently unable to go to class due to chronic fatigue, and my GPA suffered. Unfortunately, even after my diagnosis, I learned that the University Accessibility and Disability Services do not provide accommodations for periodic absence, and I was left to plead with my teachers for their pity. After college, working in healthcare, I applied for and received intermittent FMLA after a year of employment, which meant I could call out of work for periods of incapacitation without punishment or question by my employer. Anyone who's gone to UMD knows that there are strict policies regarding attendance. For university policy, students are given one opportunity a semester to use a self-signed absence note to get out of class. Past that, you'll have to negotiate with your professors for their sympathy. The University Health Center is also notoriously averse to giving out absence notes. I came down with mononucleosis as a junior and was told to take it easy for a couple of weeks, but was not given any excuse note for classes. I was expected to power through the fever, chills, fatigue, and body aches and continue with my studies without any breaks. Whereas if I got sick in the workplace, I would just use sick time to help take care of myself at home. The college experience is supposed to provide students with a well-rounded education and shape people for their lives in the workplace. If that's so, then why are the university disability services so different than what's available in the real world? Why does a student's health and recovery come second to attending a lecture that could be video recorded? We need to revise the abilities and focus of the University Health Center and Disability Services to more accurately focus on the unique healthcare needs of the individual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Purdy. Very appreciate it. Next, we will hear, and Ms. Purdy's also submitted written testimony on this. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Natasha Bagat, who is providing both oral and written testimony. Ms. Bagat, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm a young invisible. It's a name that we adults with chronic conditions call ourselves because the world doesn't see us. I have uncontrolled epilepsy, which means that I have seizures that are unpredictable and dangerous. But my medical condition doesn't define me. I love dance, music, and art. I'm a second-degree Black belt and I know what it means to accomplish goals. Like every other student, I went to college dreaming that I would get a degree, find friends, and also find a mate. But something else came first, my health condition. The time and energy I had to devote to my health did not leave room for both academics and a social life. I had to choose between them, and I chose my studies. I worked very hard, and I was named to the dean's list with a 3.8 GPA. But the university made it harder and harder for me to succeed. The campus health center didn't help me. Instead, I was sent to the security to give them my information in case I had a seizure. What kind of message did that give me? Am I a security risk, not a human being with a health condition? I had disability accommodations, but that failed to my address and chronic and unpredictable health needs. Every semester, I met with my professors to explain my situation. When they refused to work with me, I got anxious and stressed, and that made my seizures much worse. It affected my performance and attendance. At one point, my professor gave me an incomplete for 2 semesters. And without telling him, the administration gave me an F. I was devastated. I have never gotten an F in my entire life. My health suffered, and I had to take a medical leave. Last year, I decided that I would not go back because I have been through too much traumatic history. My hope today is that my difficult experience will help wake people up and bring about change. Young Invisibles need the college experience just as much as anyone else. Colleges could help us grow and graduate, but that is not happening, which leaves young people like me to ask, why are they ignoring us? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Begod. Thank you for your courage and for sharing your story and your testimony, both your oral and written. Very much appreciate it. Next, we will hear from, excuse me if I mispronounced the name, Sneha Dave with the Health Advocacy Summit, who is providing both oral and written testimony. If you could, we can't hear you. Could you unmute? The volume seems low on your end.
Can you hear me now?
If you could turn it just a little bit more. You could talk closer to the microphone.
Yeah, let's see. Give me 1 second. I will.
We can hear you, but it's low.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
It's getting better.
It's getting better? Okay.
It's getting better.
Is it okay if I talk like, is this okay now? Or?
Can you project a little bit more?
Let me try really fast.
Okay.
Okay. Is now a little bit better?
We're there, almost there. A little bit more projection.
Okay. I'm talking really as loud as I can.
Okay, we'll do our best on that. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. So my name is Sneha, and I am the executive director of the Health Advocacy Summit, which is a nonprofit that
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. That facilitates events and programs for young adults with chronic and rare conditions. And I actually just graduated from university in May of 2020, and I've lived with a severe chronic condition since I was 6 years old. So young adulthood is a very fantastic and interesting time period. There's a lot of neurobiological changes that occur, and brain plasticity changes really throughout the lifespan, but particularly during young adulthood. And to add in a chronic condition during this time can make it this time even more tumultuous. I'm sure most of you can remember your young adulthood and the various transitions that were happening, and how hard it is to really navigate what your future might look like. And so for many young adults in particular, college is the first time that they are experiencing independence. And that goes the same with young adults with chronic conditions too. So, for the first time, these young adults might be navigating insurance on their own. They might be calling their doctor on their own, having to fill prescriptions, things that might seem a little bit easy to you and I, having had gone through all these systems, but might not be obvious to people who haven't done these, and particularly young people who haven't navigated all these systems for most of their entire life. And so college health centers combined with disability services and other stakeholders within institutions of higher education have the power to support and really empower students with chronic conditions who are going to be living with lifelong symptoms and cyclical symptoms that are not always predictable. And I think historically we haven't focused on chronic conditions. We've talked about disability as a whole, but chronic conditions are a subset that's a growing demographic, and that need more support, and we need more communication within institutions to be able to ensure that more of us we have higher retention rates within these institutions, but also that we are able to achieve what we want to even beyond higher education. So that's why I'm in full support of creating a task force. I think it's much needed. And as more and more of us are being diagnosed at younger ages, it is the time to do so and to be proactive to ensure more of us have the support and resources to thrive into adulthood with our chronic condition. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for figuring out the technical difficulty on that end, but
thank you.
All of you too can hear you now, so that's great. So thank you for being here. If we could pause here, and are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for this group of panelists that are providing favorable testimonies? Okay, seeing none, we will move on now to favorable with amendments. We have Rachel London with the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Rachel London. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. We are a statewide public policy organization that works to advance inclusion of people with developmental disabilities in all facets of community life. Access to higher education is absolutely a priority of the councils, a priority of people with developmental disabilities and their families. We have worked with many of you and many of your colleagues, as well as the Maryland Higher Education Commission, on a variety of policies to increase access to all students, including those with developmental disabilities. And we just announced a very large grant that we committed to support the University of Maryland at College Park to establish an inclusive higher education program for students with intellectual disability. Now, while that's very specific and this is more broad, this bill is also another critical step to increase and expand access. We do appreciate Delegate Pena-Melnick's partnership. We share the same vision that students need the supports to be successful. And with this amendment to include developmental back in the list, and it is in my written testimony, we do think that the recommendations, excuse me, and the focus of the task force will begin to really eliminate additional challenges and meet the needs of even more students, so that they are all supported to succeed. The truth is, a lot of students with developmental disabilities are often older students. So we are not just talking about young adults in this situation, and they are more often than not have comorbid chronic health conditions, or their disabilities are in fact chronic health conditions. And so this really is what people with developmental disabilities and their families want. They want to continue to learn, continue to live, and continue to participate, not just in campus life, but in community life with the support they need to succeed and alongside their peers without disabilities. And I will just say also on a personal note, it's nice to see Gregory. We have done a lot of work together with the National MS Society. I too am a person living with multiple sclerosis as a chronic health condition. And while my schooling thankfully is over, I personally could see the benefit as I went through both undergrad and law school. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. London. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Ms. London or on this bill to any of the panelists or the bill sponsor? If there are any questions, please use the raise hand function. Seeing none, that ends the bill hearing for House Bill 59. Thank you to the sponsor and for all the witnesses for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you
Elliot
so
James,
much.
This is Michelle. There's one
Yes,
more
ma'am.
witness for that bill. Her name's Eileen Zeller. It's on the second page.
Miss Eileen Zeller, are you here?
I am here, but I actually signed up to testify for HB 244.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert. Thank you, Ms. Zeller. Appreciate it. Okay. That concludes the hearing for House Bill 59.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you so much. Next,
Thank
we will
you.
move, got it. Next, we will move to the last bill of the day, House Bill 244, Delegate Valentino Smith, Task Force to Study Access to Mental Health Care in Higher Education. Delegate Valentino Smith, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Appropriation Committee. I really want to first start by thanking Cherie and Dana, who, as we enter this new era, really had to work through a lot because the bill generated a lot of interest and calls to our office and people testify and a Martin Luther King holiday in between. So I want to thank the staff for the work on this. House Bill 244 establishes a task force to evaluate access to mental health in our institutions of higher ed. Clearly, we pride ourselves on our institutions of higher ed, and we do dedicate a lot of funding. But what we do know is we have a problem with access to mental health care. Healthcare issues are the number one or number two reason that students don't finish their higher education. They leave school or they take longer than they anticipated or needed to complete their degree. We do know that the institutions have varying mechanisms for delivering mental health services, and right now they're ineffectively meeting need. Cohort of people that we're talking about, 18 to 24, have rates of anxiety, depression, mental health crises at 60%. And 18 to 24 are the most vulnerable group because that is where the onset of mental health issues really begins and starts to exacerbate itself. Also, for minority populations, the impact of these stressors and being on campus where they're underrepresented really increases their need for access to mental health care services. And as we know, the pandemic is really just going to be exacerbating this. By way of background, intuitively, we started to hear from constituents, myself, but all of you, I'm sure, about this problem. We asked for a JCR report in 2019, and we asked for a very comprehensive report from the university system on how our public colleges and universities are managing the increasing demand for mental health, what practices they're using, how each campus tracks the number of requests, and how telemedicine is being offered. And the university system put together a pretty comprehensive response in their JCR report, but it only presented and questions than they were able to answer, but there was one consistent theme that we got in the JCR report. There's no streamlining of best practices across Maryland's campus locations. There's an overwhelming demand for care that's not being met. And the report specifically concluded university personnel have been making and will continue to make tough decisions about how to best serve their students. You know, the University of Maryland system sent us a letter of information. Are, of course, reviewing these issues. They are having conversations. They did a survey in 2018, and they take some national presentations. But what Bill's saying is it's time now to stop the self-analysis that the system's doing on their campuses and put together a group that can collaborate with diverse expertise. Time to support convening subject matter experts, key stakeholders, put legislators in, and get the task force to do the internal work that we need done. It can investigate and review the delivery points, the best practices. It can give us the opportunity to look at service models and which ones will work at the various campuses and styles of campuses. It will help us understand the barriers that exist right now, provide us with critical science-based recommendations so that we as legislators can make future funding decisions. To really lead the way in identifying the solutions to this problem that's national, but particularly here in Maryland. The bill applies to public and private institutions and community colleges. In closing, too, I just want to address the fiscal note. There are a lot of people waiting to testify, so please read through your packets. There's a lot of significant testimony, but the fiscal note states that there's a $60,000. MHIC clearly said that they advise that they'll be able to staff the task force with existing resources, and the bill requires the chancellor to send somebody over from the university system to help with the administration of it. So although we have some internal hesitancy sometimes to develop task forces, we did the JCR report. We confirmed that we have a problem. We know that it's time to initiate a more diverse conversation with experts. And so with that, I look forward to working with the subcommittee. Their requests for a lot of amendments to add in the Maryland Insurance Administration and community colleges. And I think, you know, despite the internal hesitancy, access to mental health care in institutions of higher ed is a significant problem, and hoping that we can move forward in addressing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Delegate Valentina Smith. Are there any questions from members of the committee for the bill sponsor regarding this bill? Seeing none, we have several witnesses joining us today who are going to be providing favorable testimonies on this. First, we have Tracy Content, who is providing both written and oral testimonies in favor of this bill. Tracy Content, if you're here, if you could please proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Vice Chairman Chang and committee members for letting me speak. My daughter is a 2019 graduate of St. Mary's College of Maryland. Last night, she got her acceptance into grad school at the University of Chicago, so we're very proud of that. But when she was at St. Mary's, she faced some very significant challenges. She had anxiety, panic disorder, and significant depression. And she was not alone. There were a lot of her peers who were similarly struggling. If she had been injured in a car wreck and had been in a full body cast, I know that university administrators would have turned backflips to help her extend deadlines and get things in for her courses. As it was, she met long wait lines at the Student Health Center, no after hours help whatsoever unless you count campus police, and basically administrators who did not seem to grasp that mental health issues were just as difficult and debilitating as physical illnesses. Schools need to do more than just post a list of phone numbers on a website. I think as we've seen in the pandemic with the vaccination rollout, what you have on a website and what actually happens are two very different things. And students in mental health crises tend not to be proactive. There's such a stigma associated with mental health that students will retreat, they will go back to their dorm rooms, they will blame themselves, and before you know it, you have a dropout. I speak wholeheartedly in support of this task force. I think it's long overdue. I think it will pay for itself in the long term by increasing retention and on campuses throughout the state. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tracy Content. Next, we will hear from Ms. Emma Content.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. As you heard, I'm a 2019 graduate of SMCM, and yes, I did get accepted to Chicago last night. I've testified twice before on behalf of students at SMCM in regards to mental health care access. So thank you again for allowing me to speak again today. I spent 5 years at SMCM trying to pursue my degree in political science. The professors in my department are some of the best in the entire college, and I'm still in contact with them as I pursue my master's. The friends I made at SMCM are the closest I've ever had. The education I received at SMCM has really opened my eyes to the world and allowed me to chase new experiences in my career field. Overall, I did enjoy my time at SMCM. However, this experience could have been made much, much better by timely, accessible options for mental health care. To give you a summary of SMCM's current mental health care services, SMCM only offers 4 counselors, not therapists, for close to 2,500 students. Of these, there is only 1 full-time staff member. There's 1 psychiatrist who appears once a week and takes up to 5 weeks to schedule with, no matter how urgent the issue. The Wellness Center is not open on weekends or past 5 p.m. Walk-in hours are available for 2 hours a day, during which regular appointments are scheduled with therapists, rendering them essentially unusable. And the nearest hospital is 45 minutes away and is proposed by the Dean of Students as an accessible option when it should be a last resort for students only in the most dire of circumstances. In my time at SMCM, I've watched students be denied medication, be prescribed medication out of their healthcare plan or beyond their price range, have breakdowns in the lobby of the Wellness Center due to canceled appointments resulting from understaffing, and, as Delegate Valentina Smith mentioned, fail classes and have to withdraw. In some circumstances, I witnessed students try and commit suicide. At one point in 2016, I watched my own grade slip due to inadequate mental health care options, eventually causing a panic attack that was so bad I hyperventilated, passed out, and received a concussion from cracking my head on a desk on the way down. I unfortunately still have issues from that concussion to this day. The situation at SMCM is better compared to larger campuses such as UMD and UMBC, where students have taken their lives related to the same issue. This is a tragic symptom of our larger healthcare network being unequipped to deal with mental health care needs of students. Students in higher education are one of the most vulnerable populations as they're at this unique point in their lives full of change, both mental, emotional, and financial. My fellow students' experiences at SMCM is just one example of this. It's just one example of a much larger issue that needs to be addressed not only for students, but residents across Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Content. Very much appreciate your testimony. Next, we have Samai Kindra with the Young Democrats of Maryland Caucus of Color.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Vice Chairman and everyone on the committee for having me here today. Thank you to Delegate Valentino Smith for bringing this bill back. I was before this panel last year advocating for the same bill when I was part of the University of Maryland SGA. I graduated from College Park in May. I'm now at University of Maryland Law School, but still here to advocate for this bill. I'm not going to belabor the point of the importance of mental health and the lack thereof currently on campuses. You've heard from our previous witnesses and in all the written testimony, that issue is not up for debate. There is an issue of mental health access on campuses. The question then becomes, how do we address that issue? And that is what this task force is set up to do. So in my time at College Park, I was a member of student government and a member of a number of student organizations. And every year at the top of our agenda was to try and address the mental health issues that we have on our campuses. Specifically last year, I mentioned how I lost a personal friend of mine to suicide, just to sort of highlight again the issue that we have with mental health resources on our campus. And every year we made it a priority to sit down with the administration, to sit down with other stakeholders, counselors, to see where is the issue with our mental health resources on campus and how can we fix it. and we ran into roadblocks at every step of the way. When we just wanted data to see where does the issue lie. We wanted information just to see where is the issue in our access system that we can address. In fact, we were informed that the University of Maryland actually does make this data available, but just not to everyone. They only make it available to MHEC. And when we asked for access to this data so that we could look at it ourselves as students and as organizations to try and figure out, okay, this is where the problem lies from seeing the data, let's try and address it, we were told that we weren't be allowed access to it. And we made sure and we asked this data wasn't any personal data to students. It was just metadata, if you will. So there wasn't any HIPAA issues, but they just wouldn't allow us access. And I think that's where this task force really comes into need, is to bridge that structural and transparency gap that currently exists in addressing our mental health resources on campuses. This task force will set up a singular body where all of this information can be aggregated, where it can be looked at, viewed, and in a structural manner it can be addressed. Even on campus in Maryland, we were often thrown back and forth between numerous departments and administrators asking the same question, again, because of the structural and transparency issues that exist in our current.
Thank you, Mr. Condra. If you could summarize, please. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I did not hear the timer. Sorry.
That's okay.
But yes, I urge a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions anyone has. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Condra. Appreciate it. Next, we will have Brendan Mitchell. Brendan Mitchell.
It's Brendel. Hello, everyone.
Excuse me, Brendel Mitchell.
My name is Brendel Mitchell. I'm currently 25. I'm from Montgomery County, and I graduated from Towson University in 2018. Since earning my degree, I have worked with children and adults on the autism spectrum, and I now currently work for the Maryland Coalition of Families as a youth engagement specialist, where I do young adult behavioral health, peer support, and advocacy. I have battled depression, general anxiety, social anxiety, ADHD, and PTSD since I was a teenager, due both genetics and various traumas. While I was in college, my mental health has ever been to this day. The reason I am able to be here today and support this bill, why I have found professional success, why I was ultimately successful in college, is in large part due to mental health services I access both on and off campus. Mostly every student I know, including myself, works themselves until they crash or break down, because often the pressure to succeed takes over the desire to take care of yourself until you're in a moment of crisis. On top of that, students deal with some very real personal life issues that also affect their mental health. So just to give you some insight, over the course of my college career, I went through various breakups. I was in an abusive relationship with someone addicted to drugs. I had an unwanted pregnancy and had to go through an abortion. I was sexually assaulted. I went through friendship losses, and I went through a very traumatizing car accident that left me without a vehicle for a year. It's actually very amazing that I successfully graduated from college, and that was just my college experiences alone. I didn't even mention what I've gone through in high school. So I didn't get connected with DSS, Disability Support Services, until my last year and a half of school. And even the accommodations that I was offered and able to receive didn't address the type of support that I actually needed. I graduated an entire year late solely due to challenges. Expanding mental health services on campus and making sure what is being offered fits the needs of the student population could have made a huge difference in how my college career played out. I was drowning to the point of feeling suicidal and being scared of myself, not knowing what to do. Based on my lived experiences, I strongly believe that this bill will not just improve mental health care for students, but it could very well change. I'm speaking to you today as a fairly recent college graduate, a soon-to-be grad school student, a young adult with mental health challenges, and as an advocate. Thank you for giving me space to share my story with you today.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell, for sharing your story. We very much appreciate you being here. Next, we have Ms. Ann Geddes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank
When
you,
you're ready.
Mr. Vice Chairman and committee members. I'm good. My name is Ann Geddes. I'm with the Maryland Coalition of Families, MCF provides help to families who care for a child or other loved one with a mental health or substance use disorder. We also support a young adult group that called Taking Flight, which Brendel just referenced. Brendel is a member of Taking Flight. I'm an advisor to that group, and in the course of working with these young people, I've heard so many stories of struggles to access mental health services on campus. Either there being very long waits for services or only being able to receive a very limited number of visits before having to go out and fend for themselves. And this at a time when 1 in 4 students report having a mental illness, and the suicide rates for this group have gone up dramatically during COVID too. I spoke recently with the former president of the University of Maryland College Park Active Minds chapter. Active Minds chapters exist on campuses across the country with the mission of reducing stigma, providing education about mental health, supporting others, and advocating. She explained that recently, because of the very lengthy waits to get in for an initial appointment with a campus counselor, the Active Minds group organized a campaign and protest. The campaign was called 30 Days Too Late. The problem is complex, yet innovative strategies have been undertaken at colleges and universities across the country. A statewide task force that includes the input of students is necessary to study and try to address some of the many pressing issues. Therefore, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 244.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Geddes. Very much appreciated. Also on our witness list here, I'm just going to mention the names. If they did want to say anything, please feel free to say anything. But we have also who signed up for favorable, both written and oral, is Margot Quinlan with the Mental Health Association of Maryland, and Maura Cyphers with the Compass Government Relations, providing both favorable written and oral, written testimony. And then also Allison Taylor with Kaiser Permanente, providing a favorable support for this bill. Did any of them want to say anything? Okay. Next, we also have favorable with amendments on this bill.
Just a moment, Mr. Chair.
Cyphers, is that?
I'm happy to provide testimony if the sponsor.
We're going to wait a few minutes here, or wait a little bit here.
Okay, I'll keep it really quick. Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Appropriations Committee. I'm Maura Cyphers. I'm here on behalf of NAMI Maryland. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness chapter here in Maryland. You do have NAMI's written testimony, and I think I'll just stick to a really quick couple of points, which is that adolescence and young adulthood is the time when many mental illnesses present. Half of all mental health conditions are present at 14 or develop by 24. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34 years old. And so, this is an at-risk population. You've heard firsthand that college resources are vastly inadequate to support students' mental health needs. We've got plenty of data to back that up if you need. And I think, a task force at this point is the least we can do. I know that Delegate Valentino Smith has brought this bill multiple times, and with the pandemic sort of compounding and in many cases exacerbating mental health concerns, if there's nothing we can do on a task force, then I'd say let's look at where the gaps are. There are many things that we can do to address problematic mental health protocols in higher ed today and providing better supports. So looking at how many students are being served, what's the wait time, questions of affordability, is there access to medication on campus? If not, is there transportation? What happens if a kid's in crisis? Is there law enforcement involvement in that? I can go on all day. I think this is really just the tip of the iceberg, but appreciate you letting me speak. This is an area of strong importance to NAMI. We're focused on early intervention and increasing access to care. And this population is one that needs help. And I'll just say it again, but early intervention saves lives. And so NAMI Maryland urges a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cyphers. Well, now we will go to Ms. Eileen Zeller, who is providing a favorable report favorable with amendments on this bill. Ms. Eileen Zeller, please.
Yes.
Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I know that we're running late. My name is Eileen Zeller. I retired from the federal government Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, a few years ago. I was lead public health advisor in the suicide prevention branch, and the team that I led was responsible for national grant programs, including the Garrett Lee Smith and campus suicide prevention programs. In retirement, I serve on the Governor's Commission on Suicide Prevention and the Board of Directors of the Mental Health Association of Maryland, but today I'm representing myself. I support this legislation with the 2 amendments that are in my written testimony. It is really essential that the task force explicitly address access to evidence-based practices for treating suicidal students. And the reason is that although most people assume that mental health therapists have been trained in effective interventions for treating suicidal students, the reality is just different. Studies show that many therapists don't receive this training, nor do they have the confidence to effectively treat suicidal individuals. This lack of training, lack of skills, and lack of confidence impacts their ability to provide quality care for students at risk for suicide. So what does that mean for a student who comes to the Student Health Center and opens up to a therapist about their suicidal feelings? They have every right to assume that the clinician is going to know how to respond. What they don't realize is that a common feeling among therapists is just panic. They worry the student might attempt. They worry the student might die by suicide. They worry they might get sued. They worry they might lose their license. They don't have the training skills or confidence to know what to do. And this can absolutely be exacerbated in an understaffed, under-resourced student counseling center where both students and staff are under enormous stress. Yeah, and that's it. Please pass this bill with my amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zellers. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for any of these witnesses who provided testimony today? If there are, please use the raise hand function. Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 244. At this time, on behalf of Madam Chairwoman McIntosh, just want to thank the staff for helping us get through this second day of virtual bill hearing. Let's give the staff a hand if we could. We had a couple of different things going on here, so thank you to the staff of Appropriations Committee. We really appreciate all your help, and thank you to all the committee members for all the good questions and getting through this today, this hearing. That concludes our bill hearings for today. The next full committee will meet on Friday, January 22nd at 1:30 for voting. The vote list has been emailed to each of your offices and is posted on the hearing schedule. At this time, are there any other announcements from the staff or members of the committee? Seeing none, that concludes today's virtual bill hearing. Everyone have a great evening.